So, welcome to the Kabbalah of Passover. And we're going to try to touch upon some of the ideas, central themes of the Passover Seder, but not just the actual ritual, which maybe we'll touch just upon for just a few moments. But we really want to get to the core, which is the spiritual message behind what we do at the Seder. Because the Seder is not just a time to commemorate the past, but as we know that Judaism teaches that when you come to the Passover Seder, you're actually supposed to re-experience that which happened in the past. In other words, one way to put it is that Judaism doesn't really believe in anniversaries. It's not like It's not like we're celebrating, commemorating something that happened 33 years ago, rather 3,300 years ago, I should say. Rather, what we're doing is we're actually re-experiencing it. And in some ways, what we're saying is that the same energy that was available and revealed during the Exodus is actually accessible to us every year at the anniversary. So it's not celebrating the past, it's tapping in to what's happening right now in the present at the Seder night. We want to get a little preparation so we know how to tune in to the available energy. So that's introduction number one. The next thing we want to really think about is, if you think about Judaism, Judaism is actually a religion that is, in some sense, really, I could say it's obsessed with the Exodus. There are so many things that we do to commemorate the Exodus from Egypt. So, of course, Passover is the most famous thing we do. We celebrate once a year at the anniversary of the Exodus, okay? But in some sense, really, all the biblical holidays are in some way a commemoration for the commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. Why do we sit in the sukkah? Because God placed us in the sukkah when we left Egypt. Even the Shavuot, when we received the Torah. Well, we received the Torah when it was 50 days after the Exodus. So everything is tied in the Exodus. If you look at Shabbat, if you look at every Shabbat, we sanctify the day and we say that the Shabbat, we say in the Kiddush and in the prayers, we say Zecher Liyetziat Mitzrayim. It's a commemoration for the Exodus of Egypt. So far we have Passover every holiday, once a week, every Shabbat. How is Shabbat a commemoration for the Exodus? Because when we were enslaved, we were, of course, unable to rest. The fact that we have the ability to rest and we rest on Shabbat is a sign of freedom. So every Shabbat is a commemoration of the Exodus. But then there's actually a commandment to mention the Exodus of Egypt every single day. So every single day in the Shema, when we say the Shema, if you say the full 3 paragraphs, the 3rd paragraph of the Shema, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. You have to commemorate it every day. And in the Passover Haggadah, there's a whole discussion. And the bottom line is, no, not only every day, that's not enough. Also every night. So twice a day. So we actually celebrating the Exodus, Passover, every holiday, every Shabbat, every morning and every night. And the question, of course, is why the obsession? Why do we have so many mentions of the Exodus? So it's a nice thing that happened. I understand that every now and then you have to celebrate your freedom and your independence, but why do you have to mention it every day? So I understand in America, we have the 4th of July. Okay, fine, that makes sense. It's nice, you get to see fireworks, barbecue, it's wonderful. But could you imagine if every single day you have to wake up in the morning and say, thank you, founding fathers, for declaring independence? That would be a scene a little bit obsessive. So the question, of course, is why the focus on the Exodus? Why is that the foundation of our faith? The answer is that we're not really commemorating the past, as we mentioned. Every single day, we're supposed to experience the Exodus to some degree. And on Passover is the time where we have the energy and to connect to the concept of the Exodus and freedom, which allows us to do the same thing every day. But to define that, to understand that, we have to go back and think about, okay, so what is what is slavery, what is Egypt, and what is the exodus from Egypt. So let's think about Egypt for a second. The Hebrew word for Mitzrayim, Egypt, comes from the word Meitzar, limitation, and straits, boundaries. That's the definition. That's the etymology of the Hebrew word for Mitzrayim. In other words, in addition to the simple meaning that the Jewish people were slaves in a certain geographical space called Egypt, there's also a spiritual Egypt. And the spiritual Egypt is what traps me within my own boundaries. And every day, no matter where I am, I'm limited because I'm just a person. Now, if I live exactly the way, if I am exactly the person I was yesterday, and I don't expand, and I don't develop, then in some sense, I'm limited. I'm living in a certain constraint. I'm living in a certain box. I'm living in Egypt. And that's why the Torah tells us every day, remember that you left Egypt. Every day, you can go beyond the person you were yesterday. So maybe yesterday I wasn't in a very oppressive Egypt. It was a very comfortable Egypt. Okay, so it was a very comfortable limitation. So it was a very comfortable jail cell in some sense. It traps you, it holds you in, it limits you. If you can go beyond the person you were yesterday, that is exodus, that is freedom from the limitation. And every person could take this in their own way. What is my limitation? What's holding me back? What is my Egypt? And in some sense, really what we're trying to do here is figure out what is my Egypt, and then how the Passover Seder will help me escape and free myself from my Egypt. So what I'm saying is true for every day. Every day we have to think about, am I going to go beyond the person I was yesterday? Am I going to go beyond the strait and the limitation? Okay. Especially on the night of Passover, that's, like I said, that's when the energy of freedom is in the air, and I can incorporate that ability to keep growing and keep expanding. And then I take that energy for every day throughout the year. So that is really, in some sense, an introduction of what Egypt is and what the matzah, what the limitation is. And understanding that, we understand that what we're trying to achieve, freedom, but we're living in a free country. So what's freedom? Oh, freedom from my inner oppressor, my inner Pharaoh. We'll talk about the Pharaoh later, but I have an inner Pharaoh. I have an inner Egypt. And what I'm trying to do, and why I'm preparing, and why I'm cleaning my house, and why I'm setting up the Seder table, and why I'm doing all the ritual, is really to internalize the message of freedom and somehow be able to go beyond the person I was yesterday. Because if I am just the person I was yesterday, then what do I need today for? Right? If God gave me another day, it's because God gives me more potential. Well, I have infinite potential, but God gives me opportunity to go beyond the person I was yesterday. So that is introduction number one. Sorry, big theme number one, theme of Egypt. So what we're trying to do here is that when you're going to sit at your Seder on Friday night and Saturday night, and you read the Haggadah, you read the text of the story, every time you see the word Egypt, it also means my own limitation. Every time it says Pharaoh, it also means my own Pharaoh. We'll get to Pharaoh in a few moments. So that is one very, very important point, one central point for what we're trying to do and what the Egypt is that will help us understand how we have to go beyond our own Egypt and break free from our own limitation. So that's a big idea. Now that we explain a big idea, I want to go to a nuance and show you a little nuance in the Haggadah. So I'm going to ask a question, because rabbis always make the points by asking a question. I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to give the answer, and that will expand our understanding of what Egypt is, and more importantly, what Egypt is in our life. And that's once we get the diagnosis of what the Egypt is, we can then figure out how to cure, how to go beyond it. Because as you know, as the Hasidim say, that a diagnosis is half the cure. So once we understand what the Egypt is, once we could define it and understand it, we already are on the journey toward freedom, toward inner freedom. So what we're going to do is I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to show you the text of the Haggadah that we say at the Passover Seder. We're going to go to the part of the story. And this is the beginning. So the beginning, everybody remembers. It's just right in the beginning. So everybody is still paying attention. When we start saying the story, we say as follows. We say, this is the bread of affliction, meaning we're referring to the matzah, right? Raise the tray of matzah and say, this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt, et cetera, et cetera. So I want you to pay attention and say, when did we eat the matzah? So according to this passage, according to this statement, the first statement, this is the bread of affliction our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. We ate matzah when we were in Egypt. And there are all kinds of discussions. What kind of matzah did we eat in Egypt? Doesn't say so clearly in the Torah. Well, maybe they served matzah for slaves because it was cheaper. I don't know. But let's just keep that in mind for a second without getting caught up with the history. This is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. You eat matzah in Egypt. Okay, that is one statement. Then I'm going to go toward the end of Magid, where we say the story, toward the end of the story, and we elaborate on the story at great length. And then we talk about and we say, why do we eat matzah? So let's read the description of why we eat matzah. This matzah that we eat for what reason? Because the dough of our fathers did not have time to become leavened before the king of the kings of kings. Is that a mistake? Melech Malchem Lachem, the king of the king Melech, the king of the kings of kings. Yeah, I think that's accurate. Okay. The Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and redeemed them. Thus it is said, and this is a quote from the Torah, from the book of Exodus. They baked matzah cakes from the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, because it was not leavened, for they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay. And they had also not prepared any other provisions. Okay, so if you read this verse, and I ask you a question, when did they eat matzah? Here the verse says, the dough that they had brought out of Egypt. So they ate matzah after they left Egypt. Okay, so I have a little bit of a contradiction. In the beginning of the story, you tell me, the Jewish people ate matzah in Egypt. After turning many pages and elaborating on the story and giving every detail of the story, the Haggadah quotes a verse and says, oh, you know when they ate matzah? They ate matzah after they left Egypt. So which one is it? Okay, it's probably both, but what are we thinking about? What does this represent? So in some sense, when you're looking from the perspective of the Kabbalah, there are two matzahs. There's the matzah you eat in Egypt, and there's the matzah you eat outside of Egypt. And now we're going to tie everything together, we have all the pieces of the puzzle to be able to understand what we're saying. What is my Egypt? I told you my Egypt is my limitation. Now there are two forms of limitation that I have in my life, two things holding me back, two things trapping me. The first limitation is I'm trapped by certain negative habits, certain destructive habits, whatever they may be. I'm not going to talk for you. I'm going to just talk for myself. So when I have a negative, destructive habit, it's clear that I have to break free of it. How to do it, we'll talk about later. But I understand that's matzah, that's Egypt, that's oppression, that's straits that holds me back. If I can only get rid of this addiction, if I can only get rid of this problem, then I feel my life would be more wholesome and more enjoyable. Okay, so that is the freedom that I have to break out of the Egypt of negativity. That's the matzah. Matzah is the bread of freedom. We'll talk about how that works. But matzah is the bread of freedom, and matzah is what it takes to get out of the negative, out of the prison, out of the straits, out of the limitation. So the first matzah is the matzah we eat when we're trapped by something negative. Okay, then we leave Egypt. So I say, okay, I'm done with Egypt. I don't need any more matzah. So at the end of the Passover Seder, here we have an expanding definition of freedom, because we understand that freedom means not just breaking away from negative habits, but actually breaking away also from the positive habits, from the positive structures of my life. In other words, not to be limited by the positive things I do, but to expand it. So I don't have anything negative in my life, but of course I could be more kind, I could be more patient, I could be more wise, I could be more present, right? So there's two Egypts, there's two matzahs. There's the matzah that I'm eating when I'm stuck in negativity. That's the matzah I eat in Egypt. But then when we continue the Haggadah, we learn that even after you broke free of Egypt, there is still a need for matzah. There's still a need of bread, for bread of liberation, a food of liberation. You say, why? I'm not in any prison. I don't have anything negative in my life, any negative habit that I have to shed, or anything negative that's holding me back. Okay, you're right. You don't have the limitation of negativity, but you certainly have, and you will always have, and you always have to break free of the limitation of your wholesome self, of your positive self. Because no matter who you are, no matter what you do, you're limited. You're limited by virtue of being human, but you're limited. But tomorrow and tonight, you can always grow further. So those are the two matzahs. And that's a new idea. I think I said the first idea I say every day, every year. You can't come to the Kabbalah of Passover without understanding that Egypt is limitation. Okay? And matzah is the way out of limitation, as we will discuss. But here's a new idea. Here is this two types of matzah, because there's two types of oppressions. There's the prison that I have being in Egypt. There's something negative holding me back. That's the beginning of the journey. But then, like I said, my definition of freedom expands. And even when I break out of the negative Egypt, I don't have a negative habit. If you're on this call and you have no negative habit, then this is for you. Because I judge everybody the way I judge myself. So I think everybody has some negative habits. But I met somebody who told me I have no vices, nothing. I don't eat sugar. I don't eat chocolate. I don't eat caffeine. I have no vices. Okay, fine. That's fine. I believe him. But the point here is so you're not in Egypt. You still need your matzah. Because yes, you're fine. Yes, you don't have a negative oppression, but you're certainly limited in the wholesome person you are, because that definition of whatever you are and however you define yourself, that could be expanded, and you can grow. So that's the big idea. Big idea number one is that we're not celebrating something of the past. We're actually commemorating something. We're tapping into energy of freedom, which is accessible right now, especially on the night of Passover. Big idea number one. Big idea number two is, before we start figuring out what to do, we got to figure out where we are and where we're going. So what is Egypt? Egypt is straits. Egypt is limitation. And I have to break out of my limitation. What's my limitation? Well, there's two limitations. There's what the Kabbalah calls the unholy Egypt. That's the first step. That's when you're literally in Egypt. You need your matzah to break out of something negative. But then there's also the holy Egypt, the holy limitation. I do good things, wonderful. But but whatever you do, you'd have not reached your limit because you're infinite, right? If I come to you and I say, I think you're very good at what you do, but I think you maxed out. You're not going to be able to grow in the next decade or two, right? That's terribly offensive, because innately we feel that we don't want to be limited. We want to be able to go beyond and expand, right? But nevertheless, we're very comfortable being the way we personally were yesterday. And that is, in some sense, a holy prison. If I'm in prison to negative habits, that's the unholy prison. If I follow my positive patterns of behavior, okay, so that's a holy prison. It's a holy Egypt, but I'm still in Egypt. I still need the matzah even after I escaped the physical Egypt. So even the guy who told me he has no vices, he too needs to eat matzah. Okay, so that's the big idea. Anybody has any comments or questions, please share. You don't have to wait for the end. The night of Passover is the night of questions. So if you have any questions, please share. You can write it, or you say it, whatever you like. When we were kids, when the teacher would ask a question, when a student would ask the teacher a question, and the teacher didn't know the answer, he would always say, "Save your question for the night of Passover when you ask the 4 questions." So that was the way of getting out of answering a question. So we're finally coming to the night of Passover. So any questions? There's no time to save it for. You have to share it. Okay. So that's big idea. Like I said, big idea number 2, Egypt, slavery. Okay. Next big idea, very important idea, which is probably the most important thing you'll do the night of Passover, is to eat matzah. Now, just a commercial plug for just the technicalities. If you want to really internalize the energy of matzah, you want to do the mitzvah, you want to do the commandment, you want to eat matzah, you want to eat shmura matzah. But a very important point is you want to eat it after nightfall. Some people start their seders early, which is okay. But the matzah itself, you can eat matzah before nightfall if you want to. But in addition to the matzah that you eat before nightfall, you want to do the commandment to eat the matzah on Passover. On Passover means after nightfall. So approximately after 8:30, if you start your Passover early, make sure you eat matzah for dessert. So that's just a plug for the technical side of the Seder. But now we want to get to matzah. And matzah is one of probably the most important theme of mitzvah and theme that we have the night of Passover. Because matzah is the bread of freedom. Matzah has the energy that allows us to break free of our limitation. Now, how does it work? Because it's a divine commandment, so it has the divine energy. But also matzah represents many important insights that help us break free. So there's two dimensions here. There's just the spiritual energy that bread has, and it has that bread. It has it by virtue of that's what God wants us to do at that moment. So it's invested with that freeing energy. Like if I eat matzah today, it's not going to do anything. It's not that the bread is holy. It's that the commandment is holy. So when you do it when God tells you to, that's when it has that capacity to bring freedom to your life. But in addition, like I said, the actual mitzvah, the reason why this bread was chosen is because this bread has a lot within it that alludes and shows us how to break free of our Egypt, of our limitation. So there's a lot to say. I'm just going to make a few points. You can take the one you connect to, and you can think about it by your Seder. When you eat the matzah, you could share it at your Seder, because a lot about the Seder is telling the story. Maybe we'll get to that later, the mitzvah of telling the story, telling to others. If you're sitting alone, tell yourself, right? The man tisaper, you have to say the story, you have to verbalize the story, make it real. So you could think about this, you could say this. Like I said, there's going to be a few points, and you take the one you like. Okay, so I think we have 5 points on matzah. I don't know if we'll have time for all 5 because we want to cover other subjects. But let's start the journey. So again, Passover Seder is a journey to freedom. We define the problem. The problem is straits, limitations. I'm limited. I'm held back either by a negative habit that I have, and even if I go beyond that, there's also I'm stuck in my positive patterns of behavior. I have a limit. I don't go beyond that limit. I don't try to go beyond that limit. Okay, so what's the most obvious thing that you see when you look at the matzah? The difference between matzah and bread. The obvious difference is, you can even see it, matzah is flat, bread is inflated. It grows, it rises, it represents, according to the Kabbalah, bread represents the inflated ego. Matzah represents humility. Matzah is the bread that does not rise, doesn't expand. It's, I don't want to say no ego, healthy humility. We'll define what humility means, because a lot of people misunderstand what humility is, but that's the beginning. The beginning is my ego. Bread represents the ego. If you want freedom, you have to let go of your ego. And I'm going to try to illustrate it in different ways. But this is the big idea. There are different ways to illustrate it. The simple visual that we can set up here, which I set up every year, which I should have done earlier, but I didn't, so I'll do it right now. I'm going to try and make a simple visual of chametz and matzah. So let's see this. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen to my very fancy visual. Okay, I wrote here, I took open the document, I wrote two words. I wrote chametz, which is the leavened bread, and I wrote matzah, which is unleavened bread. Now, even if you don't know Hebrew, you'll be able to notice that two of these three letters are actually the same. So it's funny, chametz and matzah are so different, but the makeup of the word is that two of the letters are the same. Right? I'm just putting on the color so it'll be easier to follow. Okay, so mem tzadik, chametz, matzah. Two of the letters are the same. Okay, what letters are the difference? So really, in some sense, what classifies the difference between chametz and matzah? One is a chet, one is a hey. Very interesting. Again, look how close, look how similar the chet and the hey are. They're very, very similar. They both have sort of three sides, like an upside down U, and they're almost the exact same thing. The only difference is that the hay has a little opening above the left leg. Okay? So that's really, if you want to boil down to what is the difference between bread and matzah, okay, one rises, one doesn't, but in the letters, and according to the Kabbalah, the letters, the Hebrew letters that comprise the word of something are really its inner energy. So what is really the difference between the chametz and the matzah? It all boils down to a little opening on top of the left foot of the hay. This little opening right over here. Okay, so what does this mean? So the image is like this. A person is in prison, right? Why am I in prison? Because I'm in Egypt. I'm in prison. I'm trapped in my prison. I'm in the chet. I'm in chametz. If you're trapped in this little prison, there's nowhere to go but down. You can't get out. That's the chametz. The matzah, you could get out of the prison. How could you get out of the prison? Because there's a little window on the top of the hay. So imagine you have a prison cell, but there's a window on top of the prison cell. You can get out. The problem is that the window is only small. So in other words, if you want to get out, you have to shed your inflated ego, because your inflated ego is going to expand and not let you get out of that prison. That's all it is. Essentially, step number one to get out of freedom, to get out of the prison, is I have to let go of my ego so I could take the advantage, take the opportunity to get out of my prison. But it's hard to do sometimes. It seems hard with my inflated ego. Letting go of my inflated ego, it's not that hard. So I'll give you a simple example, one example. So let's say we're good friends. Let's say we get into a dispute. Let's say I say, you know what? I'm willing to forgive you. I'm willing to forgive you, no problem. And you know what? I'm actually willing to apologize to you. Okay? And it's gonna be wonderful. I'm gonna apologize to you, and we are gonna restore our relationship. And it's gonna be unbelievable. The only problem is I want you to apologize to me first. Okay? So now why? Because my ego has been attacked. So I need you to apologize to me, and then I'll apologize to you. And there you have two people who are good friends or in any relationship, and nobody's talking to each other. Each one understands they did something wrong, and they're willing to apologize, but they want the other person to take the first step. Right? I'm not willing to be the person who's actually going to get out of the prison and say, you know what, I apologize. That's just one example, but it's an example that illustrates that if I'm not so focused on self, but I'm focused on what I want to achieve, then I can get out of the prison I'm in. And there's every example could be, almost every example, it would be like, okay, so why am I imprisoned with this negative behavior or with this positive behavior, but it's limited? Is because it makes me feel good. It makes me comfortable. This is how I relax. This is how something within me gives me security, whatever the reason is. But the point is, it's a focus on self. And if I want to get out of my prison, I have to say, the focus is not on myself. The focus is on what I'm needed for. What am I trying to create? What is the vision I'm trying to build for my life? That's beyond the self. And again, the more I focus on self, I can't get out of those opportunities. When I'm going to be entrapped, I can't get out. If I have the matzah, which is not inflated ego, then I can actually think rationally and understand that there are ways out of my prison, and I'll be able to achieve that degree of freedom. So that's step number one of the matzah. The matzah is in running away from inflated ego. The matzah is bread of humility. If I have humility, defined here not as I am not important, not as I am nothing, but humility defined as I'm not focusing on self, but I'm focusing on something outside myself. And why do I want to do it? I want to focus on self. Okay, that's the ego speaking. I go beyond the ego, I'll be able to break out of the prison. I'll be able to break free, right? I'll tell you in my own life. I know it's not, we're Jews, we don't do confessions. It's not Yom Kippur. Even on Yom Kippur, we don't do confessions. We only confess to God. But I'll give you my own life. I'll try to find an example, a simple example. It used to be, life was good. Kids were young, they went to sleep early. Then you have a few hours for yourself. Wonderful. I'm at the point in my life where my kids, at least some of them, go to sleep after I do. In other words, or they're not supposed to, but it ends up being that way. So I'm trying to help them get to bed or finish their homework or whatever it is. And often I could lose my patience. Why am I losing my patience? Because I'm focused on, okay, what are all the things that I have to do tonight, right? If I want to be more patient, I have to say, okay, so it's not about me. It's about what can I give them. Okay. Then all of a sudden I lose that sense of irritation. I lose that sense of impatience. Now, not to say that you don't need boundaries, not to say you let your kids stay up all night, but I'm just saying, if I sense that I have a problem with losing my patience, so one way to deal with it is tell myself, it's not about me. It's not about what I have to do. It's about what I'm going to give. And that's just one example. But if you think about it, and that's why we're doing the class on Wednesday, to give you 2.5 days to think about it. If you think about it, I think that almost every prison would, if I shift the focus from self, shift the focus from the inflated ego, shift the focus to humility, to what's the greater cause here? What am I trying to accomplish for someone greater and beyond myself? Greater as in the greater vision. Then that is the ingredient for freedom. Because if it's about me, I hold myself back. So going back to when I read the Haggadah, every time I read Egypt is limitation. Every time you read the word Pharaoh is inflated ego. Okay, so now it's a new Haggadah. So I don't know where you can buy this. We should actually publish one. The Kabbalistic Haggadah, maybe in small text on top of the word. Every time it says Egypt, it should say limitation. Every time it says Pharaoh, it should be inflated ego. And of course, the antidote to the Pharaoh is the matzah. So that's the first point about matzah. We have more points about matzah, but that's the first point. Okay, next point about matzah. Matzah, in some sense, is the bread of faith. We refer to matzah as the bread of faith. The Zohar, the Kabbalah, refers to matzah as bread of faith. By the way, it refers to matzah as the bread of faith and the bread of healing. And the Kabbalah says the first night of Passover, matzah is the bread of faith. Second night of Passover, it's the bread of healing. So if you want faith or feeling, make sure you eat matzah on both nights. But that's another story. What does it mean that the matzah is the bread of faith? So on a simple level, the Jewish people did not go into the desert with provisions. They didn't take tuna sandwiches. They were in a rush. All they had was their bread that didn't have time to rise. So the question is, yes, I know slavery is uncomfortable, but to follow Moses into the desert, which is unhospitable, and there's no Starbucks in the desert, and there's no fast food in the desert. How is Moshe going to sustain them in the desert? Okay. So the fact that they went into the desert, left Egypt, and they had nothing but a little bit of matzah represents a tremendous amount of faith in God. And that's why, if you look at, I think one of the most beautiful verses in the Torah, in the Bible, really, is if you look at Jeremiah, and Jeremiah is talking to the Jewish people about 1,000 years later, 1,000 years, a little less than 1,000 years after they left Egypt. And he's talking about the destruction of the temple and how God is upset at the Jewish people because the honeymoon was over. And now the Jewish people are betraying God, so now there'll be exile. And in midst of all this rebuke, Jeremiah says one of the most beautiful verses in the Bible, in my opinion. We say it on Rosh Hashanah. He says, God says, I remember the love of your bridal days. I remember the love of our youth when you followed me into the desert, into a land that is not sowed. In other words, God will forever remember that the matzah represents the fact that the Jewish people were able to just follow God, even though logically they say, I know Egypt may not be comfortable, but at least there's food in Egypt. So freedom is the unknown. A lot of people like to the old patterns of behavior because that's the known. And the uncomfortable known, in some sense, is actually better. And for some people, is more comforting than the freedom of the unknown. So the matzah is the bread of faith, because matzah is the idea that we follow God into the desert. We believed in God. And here is the issue. If you believe in God, the result is you believe in yourself, because you have a part of God within you. So again, what is the problem? What is the oppression? What is the limitation? Why am I trapped? I ask myself, why do I fall? Why am I trapped into the negative pattern of behavior, or a negative habit, or a negative destructive behavior? And why am I not breaking free? And the best answer I have, what makes me feel good, is I say, I can't. Say, why do you lose your temper? I can't. I have to. That's my nature. You don't want me to, God forbid, suppress my nature, right? So by the way, it works all the time. It works. If you think about it, it's a very good excuse. Someone says, why do you do this? Why do you get so angry? That's who I am. Well, they're going to tell you to change who you are. Nobody's going to tell you that. So when I tell myself, this is who I am, I cannot change, that is what keeps me back. That is what keeps me trapped, right? So what are we? We're living for a few decades, most of us, and we have a collection of our memory. We remember past experiences, and therefore we define ourselves by past experiences. And therefore, if I tried to be patient yesterday and it didn't work, then I tell myself today, don't bother trying, because you're not going to be able to do it, okay? So what is required for breaking free? A very important ingredient is the ability to say, I could do it, but I don't think I could do it. Doesn't matter. Have faith. Have faith in God. And as a result, have faith in the spark of God that's within you, which is your soul. So faith in God really brings a faith in humanity. And therefore, matzah, if you want to talk about the various themes of matzah, the ones we'll cover, theme number one in matzah is the idea that I have humility. I'm not afraid to take the first step. I'm not afraid to do something that may be a little uncomfortable for me, because my ego will survive it, right? The ego wakes up in the morning and when I wake up in the morning, I think my job today is to defend my ego, because I think that if I don't defend my deflated ego, I'm going to disappear. The reality is it's not true. The reality is I spend too much time worrying about my ego and not enough time worrying about what I want to accomplish. And the ego actually holds me back, certainly the inflated ego. So the ability to say, not focus on self, is one theme of the matzah. Another theme of the matzah, simply it's a bread of faith. This is the bread we eat when we had no logical reason to follow God into the desert, but we had faith. And when we have faith in God, we have faith in self. So when I have that voice constantly telling me, I can't do this, I can't take this, whatever that irritation is, whatever the negative, destructive thing is calling me, I can't hold myself back. I cannot take control of my life. The answer is I could. The answer is faith. And that's step number two. That's another step within the matzah. Okay, another ingredient of matzah. What's the ingredients of matzah? Matzah is, what are the ingredients of matzah? Of course, flour and water. Those are the only two ingredients allowed in matzah. Certainly in the matzah that you're going to eat Passover night. Other nights of the other days of Passover, or throughout the Seder, not the matzah that you're going to do for the mitzvah, you can have egg matzah. Today they have all kinds of fancy matzahs. They even have chocolate covered matzah. But for the matzah that you do to fulfill the commandment, it's just bread and water. Okay. But in addition to bread and water, what do you have? You have, in addition to the bread and water, you have
Bye-bye.
I'm sorry?
And matzah with bread and water?
Sorry, flour and water. Sorry, flour and water.
I'm a little confused there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, don't eat bread. I keep saying bread because in biblical Hebrew, bread is generic term for chametz and matzah, for leavened bread and unleavened bread, like in fancy English or Old English. So I keep saying bread as in flour. But yes, the ingredients of matzah are flour and water. But there's another ingredient is speed. Once the flour touches the water, you cannot let it just sit there. And once the water contacts the flour, within 18 minutes, it becomes chametz, it becomes disqualified. And that's why if you ever went to a matzah bakery or you saw a film of a matzah bakery, they create this matzah in tremendous speed. It's all by hand. Shmur matzah is by hand. And they do this astonishingly quickly. And within 18 minutes, they have multiple batches of matzah being made. So I think a piece of matzah takes 4 or 5 minutes to be made from the point that the water contacts the fire, the water contacts the bread until the water contacts the flour till it's outside the oven hard and hot where it cannot rise anymore. Okay, so speed. In Hebrew, the word chametz, which is leavened bread, is the same word for lehachmitz, which is missed opportunity. Right? So for example, the Talmud says, if you have a mitzvah and you have an opportunity to do something good, al tachmitzena, don't miss it. But the word is, don't make it chametz. Don't have the missed opportunity. So it's very interesting that in biblical Hebrew, the word, even in modern Hebrew, by the way, lahachmitz is the missed opportunity. So the word chametz, leavened bread, is the word for missing the chance. And what it's telling us is that a lot of times what holds us back is that we say, of course, I'm going to stop this. Of course, I'm going to do the right thing. Of course, I'm going to engage in positive habits instead of negative habits. Of course, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to start tomorrow, right? The point here is don't procrastinate. Matzah, the symbol is matzah is speed. If you realize something has to be changed in your life, if you realize you have to improve in a certain area, don't delay, do it immediately. That's the speed of matzah. Because if you wait too long, it's going to be a missed opportunity.
Now we can take credit for fast food now, right?
Fast food means that you're not wasting any time. But
good, I like that.
but it doesn't mean that, I'm not endorsing the fast food industry. They have other problems. Part of the problems is all the junk food they put in. We'll get to that. That's the next theme, right? So, but yes, speed. Speed means don't waste an opportunity. I can call my grandmother today. I can call my mother today. I'll call her next week. Okay. Next week, who knows what's going to happen? You may be busy. She may not be busy. She may not be here. Who knows? Okay. So when you want to do something good, when you say, I have to increase something positive in my life, don't delay. Do it immediately. Do it the first opportunity. That's again the theme of matzah. So far we have 3 points of matzah. I keep repeating it because not for you. You remember it. I keep repeating it for myself. Humility, number 1. Number 2. We said, let me see, I'm forgetting already. Humility was number 1. Number 2, I forgot already. If you look at my notes, that's faith, of course, faith. Faith is I can do it. God, I follow God into the desert. All I have is matzah. I'm just following what I think is right. And I don't know exactly how things are going to work out, but I have faith I can do it, right? I know, from past experience, I know that after a certain point, I lose my patience. I say, I don't even try to improve and be more patient because I can't. Say, no, you could. Believe that you could. Bread of faith. Number 3 is speed. You want to change something, you realize there's a problem. Don't wait for that feeling to pass. Don't make it chametz. Don't make it a missed opportunity. And it's beautiful, like I said, in the Hebrew, the word for procrastinating, the word for missing an opportunity is the same word as chametz. And therefore, like I said, the rabbis say, if you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, al tachmitzena, Don't make it chametz. Don't make time pass, because that's also a critically important point within freedom. And then there's another point, and that's what Barry says about the fast food. And fast food, is fast food good? Okay. So the ingredients of matzah are bread and water. So I ask you a question: what would be so bad if the Jews would say, put in an egg, put in some oil? Okay, one olive oil, put in olive oil, put in some salt, right? Why can't we have additions? Why can't we have accessories to the ingredients? All you have is flour and water, which is basically the essential ingredients of the bread, and we don't have any external, I would say, additional factors making it more pleasant and making it more sweet. And the answer is, at least one answer is, that again, what is the symbol of freedom? Freedom comes from within. Freedom is the idea that I don't need something external to make me happy. What is that external thing? Well, for everybody, it's something else. For somebody, it's external pleasure. For somebody else, it's external recognition, right? I'm not happy until you compliment me, and I'm constantly waiting for to be validated by other people. And when they don't validate me, I get upset, right? Whatever it may be. Understand that you can be wholesome and you can live out your potential from within. You define to yourself what makes you happy, what is meaningful to you, and you're not influenced by the external factors of society or other people's perspective, but you develop your own perspective and your own voice. And that's how you become free, because freedom means you're not enslaved to other people, to other people's perspectives. You're not enslaved to how other people define success. You're not enslaved to how other people define what is worthy of recognition. And you're not dependent on other people's recognition and validation. So that's the idea, that the bread and flour and the water is the essential ingredients for bread. The other features may make it inflate. They may make it taste good. It's pleasurable. Yes, it's very good to get pleasure. I'm very happy when people compliment me. It's very good, but it's not freeing. If I feel that I'm trapped and I need to be free, freedom must come within. From within. Nobody can give you freedom. If someone gives it to you, you're dependent on that person. And that's the fourth point we're going to say. I think it's the fourth point we're going to say about the matzah, and that is, it comes from within. It comes from yourself. It's independent of external factors. You don't need other people and other things that bring me happiness. And any of my addictions, what it really is saying is, I need an outside stimuli to give me comfort and to give me happiness. And matzah is the ability to walk away from that and say, I'm walking away from the external pleasure. I'm getting rid of the additional ingredients. Initially, it's painful. Initially, it's not, as the matzah does not taste as good as the chametz, but the chametz, the leaven, the ingredients, the external ingredients that bring pleasure, in some sense, ultimately could, if they get out of hand, they could enslave me. And I have to have the ability to say no, to say, I don't need it in my life, and I could take a break from it, right? And there's so many applications of this. I'm just going to give an example. Let's say a person feels that technology is taking over their life, okay? So you have to have the ability to say, at least for a certain period of time, for a day a week, maybe Shabbos, but whatever the case is, here we have a few days a year where we're saying, no bread, no leavened bread. I don't need the flavor. I don't need the taste. I can live by myself. That would be the example of saying, if I feel like I'm being too trapped into something, take a break. Take a break for a few days. And I actually saw this in the New York Times. I don't know if it's not meant as an endorsement of the New York Times, but I did see this. And last weekend they talked about the idea of every pleasure, if you have it too much, it becomes, it doesn't add pleasure, and you have to keep increasing the amount that you take to get you to that pleasurable point. And the only way to get yourself back in balance is to stop it for a month. They say a month. I don't even know if a month is necessary, but every person is different. The bottom line is, you have to be able to say, I don't need anything external to make me happy. I just need the flour and the water, which is the essence of bread. The things that are added to give pleasure are good. The pleasure is good. We have bread for every 51 weeks of the year. Nothing wrong with pleasure. But if I become entrapped to the pleasure, then I have to be able to say, I just need flour and water. I don't need anything else. And that is freeing. It's painful, maybe painful in the beginning, but that's freeing. It doesn't taste as good, but that's the definition of freedom. And then once I learn to do that, then I could go next week and go back to the bread, because now the pleasure is serving me and I'm not serving the pleasure. So that was the additional point. The additional point is that the bread represents the matzah represents independence. I don't need external stimuli to bring me joy. Okay, so I think that's 4 points. We'll stop with 4, and maybe we'll have 5 minutes. We'll go to another theme. But so far, again, just to review, the 4 points that we said about matzah. Number 1, matzah is humility. Number 2, matzah is faith. I believe that I can do it, even though my past experiences told me I can't. Doesn't matter. I believe I can do it because I believe in God. God is infinite. The spark of God that's within me is infinite as well. So that's, again, that's humility. That's faith. That is speed. Don't delay. If I want to improve, don't say after the holidays, I'm going to start. You start today. And that applies to every area of life. You know, everybody, I'm going to change my lifestyle. I'm going to become a little more healthy. Okay, after Pesach. No, start today. And then finally, we have the idea of independence. I am not dependent on something external to bring me joy. I'm going to give up the external pleasure. Seems to be pleasure, but it's really enslaving me. And when I don't need it, when I shut it down for a little bit, then when I come back, like I said, it's serving me, I'm not serving it. So these are the 4 points. Okay, I'm going to say one more point about the 4 cups of wine, because that's also important aspect of the Seder. So just a technical point here, it's not a biblical commandment. In the Torah, it doesn't say you have to drink 4 cups of wine. There are other things the Torah says you have to do that night, which is eat matzah. In days in the temple, you also had to eat the Paschal offering and the bitter herbs. Today, we eat the bitter herbs just as a commemoration. So the bitter herbs are only a rabbinic commandment, but the biblical commandment is only matzah, but also to tell the story. That's also a biblical commandment, to tell the story of Passover. So we'll leave that for another time, the telling of the story. But the rabbis said, well, you want to do this right, you should drink 4 cups of wine. Why 4 cups of wine? Well, the rabbis like wine. We know that. They instituted that we say we drink a cup of wine by any important religious occasion. Every Shabbat, every holiday, at the wedding. These are all rabbinic enactments to add wine. But why 4 cups of wine? That seems to be excessive. Yeah, it's hard for me to drink 4 cups of wine. I do some grape juice, don't tell anybody. The idea here is as follows. The rabbis say, let's look at the Torah. And when God tells Moshe, I'm going to take the Jewish people out of Egypt, he uses 4 expressions of redemption. He says, Vehotzeti, I will take you out. V'ga'alti, I will redeem you. V'hitzalti, I will save you. V'lakachti, and I will take you to me as a people. So there are 4 expressions of redemption. And the rabbis say, okay, so there's 4 expressions of redemptions in the Torah. To commemorate those 4 expressions of redemption, we are going to drink 4 cups of wine. Why wine? Why wine? So wine has, according to the sages, wine has the feature that they say, Nichnas yain yatzas sod. Wine comes in, secrets come out, right? Wine has the ability to express that which we hold back. And sometimes we won't say anything, but you say a little l'chaim, and it helps us loosen up and speak from our heart. And that's what the function of wine is. And in some sense, that's really what freedom is, because freedom is to express the deeper potential that we have within ourselves. And when we do that, we drink the wine, it's sort of, we can take away, we can allow for the deeper potential to express itself. And that is the essence of freedom. So it's 10:59. We have a lot more to say, of course. I mean, the whole people could sit all night, all week preparing for the Passover Seder, but we have 60 seconds left. So I think we just want to summarize what we said till now. And of course, there's so much to read about. You can check Chabad.org, Passover. There's so many essays and articles that you can do and you can prepare. The main thing is to say, how do I apply it to myself and to the people around the table? How do I help people realize that we're not talking about an ancient story, but we want people to ask themselves a simple question: what is my Egypt? And what am I going to do to get beyond my Egypt? If I can raise those two questions in an interesting way and help people define that and explain that, then that it would be a very successful Passover Seder. Okay, so just quickly to summarize at least the points I remember. Every time I read the Passover story, or certainly the Haggadah, the night of Passover, and I see Egypt, I think about Egypt is limitation. Either limitation, I'm being held back, I'm being trapped by a negative habit, or I'm just at capacity. I'm limited in the past. There's nothing negative going on right now, but I'm not going beyond. I'm not putting in an effort to go beyond what I usually do. Either way, it's straits, it's limitations. Either way, I need matzah, the bread of freedom, to break out of my limitation. Why am I trapped in limitation? Because it's more comfortable. And it's hard to break out. And my ego doesn't want me to do anything that's hard because it feels I won't survive. Of course, I will survive. I'll actually be happier, but that's another story. And therefore, what do? The main ingredient is matzah. What is matzah? So you heard me say this before. Matzah is humility. Matzah is faith. Matzah is speed. And matzah is independence. These are four themes of matzah, all packed into one class. And then I have the 4 cups of wine, which is understand that even if I don't see that I have this potential within me, you put in the wine, the secrets come out. You consume the 4 cups of wine or grape juice, and your hidden potential that is within you, because you have a part of God's infinity within you, will emerge for the rest of the year. So that's the story in short. A part of the story in short, just a little wetting our tongue, so to speak. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful, wonderful Passover.